everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today, I don't have a recipe for you. We're mixing it up a little bit. I am gonna be answering questions that were left on the community board on YouTube. Always love answering reader questions because troubleshooting is like a big part of what I do.
Just wanted you to know I'd like to ask a question. Something's bugging me, been on my mind. Sure be great if you clarified.
Is there a recipe that you look back on with regret? How often do you revise / republish recipes? I mean, I don't really look on recipes with regret. That's like too strong. There are things that I would change about a lot of recipes. Sometimes I look back on recipes from the early part of my career and just feel like they're too fussy. Like I would just like tone it down. I think in the early part of my career, it's like, oh, I'm excited to like show off technique and knowledge and, incorporate that into recipes, and it's just like not that important and doesn't necessarily make it better. So generally I would go back and make it a little simpler, but no like specific regret because it all compounds and like makes you better. So I couldn't really have it be any other way. And I don't really republish recipes unless there would be like a tremendous error, but that's never really happened. I mean, there's errors definitely from, cookbooks, but they're minor. Okay. If you freeze cookie dough, is it best to bake from frozen, but for longer than the listed time, or let it thaw and come up to room temperature, then bake as per recipe? It's up to you. I think for ease, just take it right out of the freezer, put it on the baking sheet and bake it, add another minute or two to the bake time. There's really no added benefit to thawing it first. Just keep it simple, bake it straight from frozen. Great question. Hi Claire, love your videos so much. Thank you. Do you have any tips for transitioning into working in a professional bakery with only home baking experience? I would say just remain very open to instruction and to correction, because in any kind of professional kitchen setting, like there's going to be a particular way that place likes to do things, and to sort of be trainable and be open, be very oriented towards learning, like be a sponge in the beginning and just go into it with the attitude that's like, I'm here to learn. Try to be less focused on like showing what you already know from your home baking experience and more just learn the ropes. Hi Claire. I have a baker's etiquette question. If you bring a whole cake or pie to someone's home as a dinner guest, who keeps any leftovers? I feel like it's nice to leave them with the host, but I absolutely love some leftover pie for breakfast. All right, this one to me is clear. You bring something to someone's house, that is for them. That's theirs, that is the host's. That is your duty as the guest, like you're bringing something that belongs to them. If it's like a super, super close friend, maybe you could be like, hey, could I just like take a little piece of pie home in like a container to enjoy tomorrow? But like, if you like breakfast pie, then like make a second pie. Sorry. Would you ever do videos on things like jam making / canning? I'm super interested in learning to preserve my own food. Preserving to me is like the next frontier in my own learning, because now we're like growing food. This is really more of like a thing in the summer for us, because we have fruit trees and a garden and fruit bushes. And so I love making jam. I have tried traditional canning in the past with a canner and the boiling water and everything. There's a lot to learn. Part of me is like, do I want to really wade into that mess because of all of the food safety rules around it? And so there's a lot of education that I think I need to do, but I love the idea. And so I'm kind of slowly learning on my own, and hopefully at some point we'll have info to share. But love jam, love preserving. In your opinion, what is the best way for someone to start baking, and what do you think is important for them to know? I'm a novice baker, having only baked things from a package, for instance, a cake mix, but I want to try and make many of your recipes. I just don't know where to start. I mean, I wouldn't start with something that you know is going to be extremely complicated. I would maybe avoid like a yeasted recipe, because that's a variable that you have to control that is like not something you need to do as a beginner. Other than that, I would just say start with the thing you want to eat. Pick a tested, well-written recipe. I would say one of my own, because that's what I strive for. And then make it a few times. Make it 5 times. Make it over and over again, because that's where you really do the learning. That's where you start to learn like what variable is different, why does the cookie spread more, in this oven versus that oven, the temperature of your butter, all these things. So the way that you learn, there's no shortcut. It's about practice and doing it, and often you get the benefit more when you're doing the same thing over and over again versus picking a new recipe every time. So number one piece of advice, but love the question. Has there ever been a time during recipe development where you completely gave up and accepted defeat? If so, what was the food item and the problems you faced with it? Yes, I have given up in recipe development, but I wouldn't say that it feels like accepting defeat. It's more of like you're being humbled a little bit. And it's more about understanding that sometimes, like, if you can't put a square peg in a round hole, sort of. So sometimes when I've given up on a recipe, it's because I kind of realize, like, this doesn't want to be a recipe. It's like I had an idea, there's a conception, and the execution, it just doesn't match the expectation. And, like, I'm not going to be able to bridge that gap. So it's like I need to pivot. Like, my idea needs to change. My expectation needs to change. So that's really kind of what happens. Like, an example is, like, I tried to do a recipe for grapes jubilee, like a grapes flambe, and it doesn't work because grapes don't behave the same way as, like, cherries when they're cooked. So it's like it just didn't want to be the recipe that I wanted it to be. So I had to move on. Hey Claire, if I'm baking a cake and want to cut the ingredients by half, how do I calculate cooking time for a now half-sized cake? If it's smaller, it should bake faster, right? Really, really good question, and not the simple answer you might expect. Like, you would think half the amount, half the bake time. It's not always the case. It depends a lot on the dimensions of the thing you're baking. So maybe you have like a layer cake recipe and you cut the recipe in half, but you bake it in a loaf pan. It's not going to be half the time. A lot of it depends on the volume of batter and the amount of, like, I want to say the words thermal mass. That's not really right, but it's like the amount of mass of batter that the heat from the oven needs to penetrate to get to the center to make sure it's fully cooked. That is the main determinant. So if you could be baking like a huge quantity of batter, but in a super thin layer, and it's going to bake a lot faster than something even that's half the size, but that's like in a much sort of taller vessel. So it really depends. Probably not the simple answer you wanted, but watch it. I would say start with half the bake time, but like be alert, have your nose like be on alert, be looking at it, have the oven light on. And then as you gain experience, you'll know like, oh, if I was going to bake 2 cake layers, but I'm only baking 1, maybe it takes 2/3 of the time. It's that kind of thing. It's just like, it's physics. What is your favorite Julia Child / Barefoot Contessa / other famous female baker / chef's recipe? Oh my gosh, good question. I mean, I have so many like favorite or like beloved figures like an Ina or a Julia Child. I don't cook a lot of the recipes because like so much of my life is developing my own thing and also just kind of more intuitive type of cooking or baking. But Julia Child has this really famous chocolate almond cake that I've made several times. There's a Barefoot Contessa like coconut cupcake recipe that I've made. Like, this is going back like a long time, but that's like so delicious. So there's a lot, but they're super quirky because it's like I'm not always trying a lot of their like recipes in their library. Any tips for people who are too scared to make anything because if it comes out bad, it's a waste of food? Love your content, Claire and crew. Thank you. I will say that having chickens and composting does help to spin your idea of like food waste more positively. But of course I understand the fear of sunken costs, like time and money and ingredients like going to waste because something didn't turn out. Try to like keep it simple, manage your expectations. Start with one of those recipes on the internet that has like 10,000 5-star reviews. It would be relatively uncommon for something to turn out so badly using like a well-tested recipe that you couldn't even eat it. So I hear you, but I would just say like push through the fear. Hi Claire, when I make your blueberry cream cheese Danishes, the layers often slide off of each other like a deck of cards in the oven. What do I do to get them to stop sliding off? Yes, I know what you're referring to. Usually this is a problem when the butter is too warm. The proofing is at room temperature because if it's not at room temp and it's too cold, the yeast won't actually do anything and you don't get the proofing and puffing that you need. One thing you can try is after you proof them, put them back in the fridge or even the freezer if you have the space for like 10 minutes, 5 if it's in the freezer, 10 in the fridge. And that is going to help sort of set the butter, and you will probably find that this doesn't happen as much. That separation is normal. Some kind of like sliding around is normal, but yeah, it sounds like a butter temp issue. Oh, that's it. Okay, actually it's like an amazing group of questions. Love this round. I love the mix of kind of like more theoretical questions and then like very practical troubleshooting for people's baking woes. Vinny is working on a way to feature your baking video questions in the next episode, I see, so we can take a look at some of your baking fails. Although, I mean, it's okay, fails, it's fine. Sometimes they're fails. Okay, so share some of your questions in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.